For those who don't know me, my name is Damo, and I'm a member of the church here. Usually every fifth Sunday of the month, and there are about 3 or 4 months of the year that have 5 Sundays, we have another man other than our preacher Roy take the pulpit and bring the lesson and or the sermon. So today is my turn, and hopefully we'll learn something worthy from the Word of God, something that we can practice in our lives. Before I start, I just want to say something that perhaps you are already doing some of the things that I'm mentioning in this lesson. So this lesson is not directly directed at a particular person. It's as much for you individually as it is for me and for all of us. So hopefully we can all learn if we're struggling, or we can do things better if we're already doing these things. The end of the year, it's generally a time when people make New Year's resolutions. And if you looked at the bulletin, you saw that the title was, "Is this in your New Year's resolution?" Some people think about something that they want to quit. And smoking comes to mind first. Or another bad habit. Or maybe not bad, but something that you'd like to improve. Maybe you are setting as a goal to go to the gym more often, or to go walking, or to paint your house, or do some scrapbooking, or something that you have neglected for a year. So today we're going to talk about, perhaps I can suggest something else that we add in our New Year's resolution if it's not to feel already, and this is being humble, or having humbleness in our lives. So the structure of the lesson will be, first we're going to see what is humbleness from the worldly point of view and from the biblical point of view. Why do we need to be humble? And then at the end, how do we actually become humble in our lives? When we think of the word humble, or humbleness, or humility, which are synonyms, it comes to mind a situation when we were embarrassed or ashamed. Nobody is happy. It's like, yesterday I was so humbled at the office. I'm so happy about it. I'm so joyful. No, usually with the idea of humbleness comes this sadness, this I don't feel so good about it. It's something bad happened. And that's true because the definition of the word humbleness involves some of those things. One definition would be considered low in rank, quality, or station. But another one, which is a little more positive, is a person marked by meekness, modesty in behavior, attitude, or spirit, not arrogant or prideful. The biblical example that we have, the best definition that we can ever see, comes from John chapter 13, verses 3 to 5. John chapter 13, verses 3 to 5. Jesus, knowing that the Father had given all things into his hands, and that he had come from God and was going to God, rose from supper and laid aside his garments, took a towel and girded himself. After that he poured water into a basin and began to wash the disciples' feet and to wipe them with the towel with which he was girded. John has an interesting way of describing what is happening here. He starts in verse 3 describing the qualities of Jesus. He's saying, Jesus, knowing that the Father has given him all things, and that he had come from God and was going to God. So the setup here is that Jesus, being this great man that he was, is going to do something great. So if you didn't know the story, you would assume that he's going to give a big speech, or he's going to asked to be given something really important because he is this great man. But he does something really humbling. He washes the feet of his disciples. And I'm sure we've all had dirty feet, a situation when you were cleaning something and you got really gross that you didn't even want to touch your own feet, let alone someone else's. But if you go back in your imagination, 2,000 years ago the streets were not the way that they are today, and footwear also was not the same. People wore sandals, or sometimes they were barefooted in dust, dirt, grime. All this yucky stuff was on your feet. So the job of cleaning someone's feet was reserved for a slave, and not just the common slave, the middle level slave, but just the lowest of lowest, the youngest, or the slave that had nothing, no redeeming quality. Keeping in mind that some slaves could know how to read or account or do other things. So it was pretty much the lowest job that you could ever think of somebody doing. And here Jesus does it, and not just one disciple or two or three, the closest, but he cleans the feet of all his disciples, more than one disciple. And then he explains to them, in a few words, why, what was the purpose of this. He said, beginning in verse 12, when he had washed their feet, taken his garments, and sat down again, he said to them, "Do you know what I have done to you? You call me teacher and Lord, and you say, well, for so I am. If I then, your Lord and teacher, have washed your feet, you also ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you." So it's really simple, right? Why do we have difficulty understanding this? Why don't we have somebody at the door there washing our feet when we walk in? Maybe our feet are not as clean as we might think, or as dirty as we might think. But the idea here is not to take it physically. Nobody is expecting you to do that. But it's the idea of being humble and serving. This idea is echoed in the New Testament, following a few letters. In Philippians chapter 2, this is a great passage that talks about humbleness, and it explains why we should be the way that Jesus is. It explains Philippians chapter 2, verses 5, beginning in verse 5 to verse 8. In your relationship with one another, have the same mindset as Christ Jesus, who being in very nature of God, did not consider equality with God something to be used to his own advantage. Rather, he made himself nothing by taking the nature of a servant, being made in human likeness. And being found in appearance as a man, he humbled himself by becoming obedient to death, even death on a cross. So being humbled from the biblical point of view is not this concept of ashamed or being lowered to appear weak or to appear worthless in front of other people, but it's the idea of not having pride, not having self-righteousness, being willing to serve and to give glory and honor to God for what you're doing, and not be prideful and claim that you are doing everything, or whatever you are doing, you're doing it based on your own abilities. Why should we be humble? We pretty much answered this by the verses that we read. The first reason would be because Jesus is humble, and that's what he commanded us. It's really simple for us to say that we are like Jesus and to sing to him and just to do those things that outwardly show that we are Christians, to participate, to take the Lord's Supper, to dress nice when we come to church. But being like Jesus implies that we are fully like Jesus. And if he gave us an example of humility, we are to follow this example. The second reason is a little more complicated, but it explains, or it follows, the process of what happens when somebody becomes a Christian. See, when you are not a Christian, you're doing whatever you think that is right in your own life. You are going through life, making your own decisions, being the Lord of yourself, trying to figure out things and trying to do what, according to your knowledge at the moment, is right and it serves you. When you become a Christian, you decide to give your life over to Christ. You decide to make Christ the Lord of your life. And it's a little bit difficult to understand for us this relationship between Lord and servant, or master and slaves, because we don't have any of those. We don't have slaves anymore. Maybe if you lived in another country, you could hire somebody to be a servant, whether a full-time driver or a full-time maid or a full-time nanny, which would be the closest to a servant that we would have today. But these people to whom these words were written, they really knew what Jesus was talking about when he was talking about being the master and the Lord, and then being the servant. In Acts chapter 20 and verse 28, it's a well-used verse about how the elders should be the shepherds of the flock. And sometimes we oversee a little bit about what else is written in that verse. Acts chapter 20, verse 28. Keep watch over yourselves and all the flock of which the Holy Spirit has made you overseers. Be shepherds of the church of God, which he bought with his own blood. So let's look at the word bought. How do we understand when somebody buys something? It's the idea that you possess it. It's the idea that you can dispose of it if you don't like it anymore. It's not the idea that you're using it temporarily or you're managing it. Possession is, the legal term is you have the full rights. The right to give it away, the right to destroy it, the right to use it as you see fit. So this is the idea that when we become a Christian, we are bought by Jesus. We're not free will people anymore. I don't mean this to say that we cannot choose to do whatever we want. But I mean to say that God is the one that is directing, is expected to direct our will in our lives. In 1 Corinthians chapter 7, verses 21 to 24, we also see the same idea. Verse 23 in that passage, 1 Corinthians 7, 21 to 24, verse 23 says, "You were bought at a price." Once again, echoing the idea that we are not free men anymore. We are free in the sense that we are not slaves to sin, but we are not free to do whatever we please, whatever we still think that it's right in our lives. That's the second reason for being humble, because you are a servant. You are a servant of God, you are a servant of Jesus, and you should display these qualities that are expected from a servant. Of course, if you hire somebody to clean your apartment or your house and you tell them how to do it, and you go out for supper or whatever, you come home, you expect it to be cleaned the way that you want, right? Use this rag for these windows, use this vacuum cleaner for these floors. When you go to a restaurant and you ask for a certain food to be brought to you, you're not asking for advice whether that burger goes well with your diet, with your cholesterol. You're asking for somebody to serve you. So the idea is when Jesus is asking us to serve Him and to be humble in that way, that's a way that He expects us to be humble. Not, well, I'm humble with pride. Or, oh, I'm humble in my own way. You can tell me how to be humble. I'm the most humblest person in the world. No. You're a servant, and the example of humbleness that you should use in your life should come from Jesus. The third reason, perhaps it's not even important, but it's important, a little bit important in the sense of bringing the worldly concept of working with somebody who's humble. Perhaps we grew up in a family when we didn't have a lot of humbleness in our parents. Maybe we never had the right to say anything, even when it was right. Or maybe we lived in a country where there was a dictator that told people what to do, and humbleness was outlawed. Maybe we work in an office when somebody always wants to tell us what to do, and they never want to accept any advice, any suggestion, or anything to make things better. So we know how hard it is to work with somebody who's not humble. Somebody who's always arrogant, prideful, somebody who always thinks that they have all the answers, no matter that they have no degree in it. Sometimes this is your boss. Or you know, when you are trying to do something, work for God. It's difficult to work with people that are not humble. So, for those three reasons, because Jesus showed us what humbleness is, and He is humble, because we are servants, and we are expected to be humble, and because it is easier to work and to do the work of the Lord with humbleness, and with people who are humble, we should be humble in our lives. Now, how do we do this? How do we go about being humble and not prideful and arrogant, which are the opposite? Well, the first thing is to consider yourself what you really are. So to understand that pride has no purpose, has no room in the life of a Christian. In Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4, we'll read a couple of good sentences that are good advice for us. Philippians chapter 2, verses 3 and 4. Do nothing out of selfish ambition or vain conceit. Rather, in humility, value or consider others above yourselves, not looking to your own interest, but each one of you to the interest of the other. How do we understand these two verses? What does it mean to consider yourself or to value others above yourselves? Well, it means that you should consider that their thoughts, their opinions, and their actions are better than yours. A little disclaimer is necessary here. I'm not talking about people that are doing wrong or people that are sinning. There's always responsibility to correct those people. But I'm talking about things when we just don't like those ideas. We don't like those thoughts or those opinions. In the area where we have the freedom, with humility of course, to have difference of opinions. So if a brother or a sister is suggesting something you don't agree with, be humble and support it rather than smacking it down and saying this is not going to work. And this could be as easy as, what are we going to serve in a picnic? Somebody likes hot dogs, somebody likes hamburgers. That's not something for somebody to leave the church because your idea of serving hot dogs was rejected, or your idea to serve hamburgers was rejected. So simple things like that, that there's no right or wrong, but there's, excuse me, there's the pride factor. This is my picnic, I'm going to decide on the menu. I don't like Pepsi, we're only going to serve Coke. It's things like that that sometimes are tiny little things, these petty things that cause people to stumble and to fall. Whenever you are doing something, consider how will your brothers and sisters benefit from what you're going to say or do. It's really easy when your pride is hurt, and that's another reason not to have any pride. There's nothing to be hurt. But sometimes we take things very personally. Somebody might say something that has to do with the picnic, going back, and we take it as they don't consider us human beings anymore. They're stomping all over ourselves. And let's remember that whatever we say and do, it's supposed to build and lift each other up. Colossians 3:12 echoes the same message. Therefore, as God's chosen people, holy and dearly loved, clothe yourself with compassion, kindness, humility, gentleness, and patience. Being humble comes from a true and a sincere heart. You can't be humble and still have malice in your heart about your brother or sister. It's something that you need to purify. You can't just have a compartment in your soul where all malice is pended up and you're like trying to put a rain around it and you're trying to fake humbleness because, wow, the preacher, that guy that day said I need to be humble, so I'm going to be humble. Have you ever been in a situation when somebody's apologizing, but they don't really want to apologize? They're forced to say that they're sorry. So they go like, fine, I'm sorry. You know that's not a true apology. Or if they say, if I have offended you, then I'm sorry. It's like, it's your fault that you are offended. No, when you did something wrong, you know you did something wrong, so you should have a true apology. The same is true about being humble or having compassion or having gentleness, having patience. You can't be like, fine, I'm going to be patient today. People don't want that. People want true patience. People want true love. I've got to love my brothers today. That's not true love. See, I see you smile, but we understand we've been in situations when people do those things, and that's not true humbleness. We need to have this true and sincere heart. Another thing that we can say about humbleness is that it has to be accompanied by works. And we talked a little bit about doing works during the class, but being humble doesn't mean that you are isolated, that you don't do anything, you don't say your opinion because you were trying to allow the other people's opinion to be done, but it means that you do these actions, you show patience, you show love, you show compassion, you just do it in humbleness. And one way to think about this, or to remember it, a famous American president said, ask not what your country can do for you, but ask what you can do for your country. And it's very famous. You can Google and see it on Google, I guess, different websites. One way that we can look at this in the church is don't ask what the church can do for you, but ask what you can do for the church. I've heard people say that there's nothing in the church for me. There's nothing in the church for my children. I don't get anything out of the worship service. Well, what are you bringing in the worship service? What are you doing for your children? What are you doing for your teens? We all have different talents, so perhaps our talent is not to teach children. So I'm not saying, start teaching when you don't know what you're doing. But it's the idea of serving. We all have talents. We all need to look at what we can offer God. It's really difficult to work when some people are doing the work and the other people are complaining about why isn't enough work being done. We need people to produce. We need consumers for sure, because you don't want to have 10 people teaching classes or 10 people organizing the picnic and nobody goes to enjoy the hot dogs or the burgers, or both hot dogs and the burgers. But you also need people to teach. You need people to step up and to use their talents that God has given them. All these things are difficult. I don't expect us to wake up on Tuesday and have a perfect humbleness, but it's something to consider. It's being a Christian is difficult because we live in a world that the majority of the people don't understand or don't care about how we live our life. So let's not make life more difficult for our brothers and sisters by being prideful and arrogant, but let's have this spirit of humbleness. In Galatians chapter 6 and verse 2, it's an important verse that gives us a little motivation about why or the importance of wanting to be humble. Galatians chapter 6 verse 2. Carry each other's burdens, and in this way you will fulfill the law of Christ. And so this is something that we are once again commanded to do. And the last verse that I want to leave us with a thought is that whatever we are doing when we are showing humbleness and compassion and works of service, whatever we are doing for a brother and a sister, remember that we're actually doing it for God. Jesus himself said in Matthew 25, verse 40, "Truly I tell you, whatever you did for one of the least of these brothers or sisters of mine, you did for me." So I want to leave us with these thoughts, and hopefully as we go about starting the new year and doing all those good things we have already put in our resolution, please let's keep these things in mind, that God expects us to be humble and gentle, patient and kind with one another, and let's try to uplift one another and share each other's burden. Thank you.
Amen.